Welcome, friends, to At Home with Theosophy. This is our third class exploring the book In the Outer Court by Annie Besant. So in the first class, we saw an introduction and the idea of purification. Then in our previous class, we looked at the working with our thoughts, thought control, mastery of what we think, and the purification of thought also. And today we are going to continue with the work for all those who are aspiring to get to the outer court, and also this is the work that is deepened in the outer court.
Yeah, she Annie Besant really explains here in this chapter the differentiation between those that are climbing to the outer court, those that are in the outer court, and then those that are on their way to the inner court. So I really like this. Once again, there's a lot of material in this chapter that she goes over. But it was, for me, it was really enlightening or enriching to see why it's so important to start working on the little things instead of thinking about, oh, there's all these grand things that I have to work on that I can't reach or that I can't get to. But if I work on the building of character as she suggests it here, what I'm doing is doing the little things that I do and doing them to perfection.
Yes, and those little things become the big things. What we are going to see today is that these little things are the path, and our minds sometimes take us to flights of imagination, and that is just imagination. If we do the little things in the best way we can, and using all these principles that Annie Besant is sharing, before we realize it, we will find ourselves ready to take on some other work.
It's just like any practice that we do, if it's a musical instrument or an athletic event or anything, the first thing we work on are those scales or those skills or those drills, and we do them over and over again until it becomes second nature, so that when we get put into the big game, we know exactly what to do, and we don't have to think about it. We do it just absolutely from, memory or motor memory, like that.
All right.
We ready?
Let us start.
The building of character. Into the court of the temple, utterly unhewn stones cannot be brought for the building. The hewing must have been going on during many previous lives. Much work must have been done upon the characters before they become fit to be built at all, even in the outer court of such a temple. And this rough hewing of the character is supposed to lie behind us. We are dealing with the building of the positive virtues and virtues of an exceedingly higher and noble type. Annie Besant later in the chapter makes a distinction between those that have positive virtues or the religious type, and those that are in the outer court. So what she's saying here is that in the outer court, there are no boulders, misshapen rocks. Everything that is in the outer court has already been hewn to a bit so that it looks like a building block. And that the building block, the main point of this building block is that it's going to go into the temple. It's going to go in the metaphor of building a temple. So that's the main idea. It's a deliberate and purposeful idea. So these rocks or these stones that are being brought in here, they're not perfected. They're not that polished marble yet. They still have, maybe little bumps and chips in them. But the idea is once they've gotten to the outer court, at least they're shaped into where they're into the direction or the ideal of where they're supposed to go.
Yes, a difficulty when talking about these things is that our mind may have the tendency to look at all these things with ambition or with frustration or disappointment. We are talking here about a cosmic process of an astonishing scale. It's something that it's the maturing of a divine entity, which is our true spiritual self, of a quality that we cannot even imagine. So this is a work that takes overall many lifetimes, many lifetimes. And wherever we are at the moment, it doesn't really matter. Time, it's like the child being frustrated because he's not an adult, that children many times feel. But it's not really important. What is important is that the child goes through childhood in a healthy way, and before he can realize it, he's an adult. And if he went through childhood and the teen years in a healthy way, he will be a healthy adult. So here, when we see all these things, we should try not to let our mind come into how far am I from this or how close. Just see this, enjoy the whole landscape, and just see what your next step is.
And for me, I notice my mind goes to, I'll never make it this lifetime. I'll never get there. But I just had a thought. If you think of the actual building of a stone from a mineral to where it gets to be a stone, that's an awfully long process. That's years and years of processes. But the process from taking that unhewn stone into a rough ashlar, so the shape of that's going to go, doesn't take quite as long as the making of the stone. And then from the stone to go from that rough ashlar to a polished stone that will fit into the building, there's another process that takes some time, but not as much time as, say, to get from the bottom of the hill of the mountain to the top of the mountain, to mix metaphors.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, but that's a good way to put it. And also, our personality may not be here or there, but we have to always remember that we are not this personality. We will be there. I always used to think that, when thinking about future lives, I had the sense, well, I'm not going to be there. And then I would say to myself, well, I said the same in my previous lifetime, and now I am here. So in the future, I will feel myself as much as I am feeling myself here. Right. So all this question of time is really an illusion. And that is important to understand because that frustrates the mind.
And so the first thing that will be noticed in these candidates in the outer court is the definiteness of purpose and the deliberateness of action. This was a quote that really struck me because, and I'll just reiterate this again, what she says here is that in the outer court, the main purpose or one of the main ideals is that you know where you're going, you know how to get there, and you know that you can get there by these processes or by this path. As where it seems before we get to the outer court, we always have doubts. Am I doing the right thing? Oh, I'm doing the right thing. How come I'm not getting a positive response to it? And, oh, this karma is just wreaking havoc on my life right now. So we go back and forth where, we think, oh, I really got it, to I'm nowhere near it. So this is when we're in the outer court, when we get there, we know, we understand, and we'll see, I think in the next slide, about the law. We understand the ultimate law and how those laws of nature fit into things instead of a more questioning mode.
Yes, I think that to a large extent is a question of experience, of having gone through these kind of situations, this kind of process for a few years or a couple of lifetimes. It's like in anything else. When we, at the beginning of our starting a new project, not really knowing, we are learning about this, we are hesitant, and we try, and then we may not be able to do something. But somebody that went through that realizes this is not because this person is not good at this. It's just a natural process. And after some time doing this, the confidence will come. So this again is something we have to keep always in mind. It's never a question of, am I worthy enough or not? Am I good enough or not? We are divine entities. The only difference is just a question of time, of experience. So for sure, we are worthy enough. And eventually this will flourish. We just need time, experience in doing this. And then that definiteness, that deliberateness comes naturally.
And he builds with deliberate purpose, recognizing the law that underlines every aspect of nature. The law must give back the equivalent of that which he gives. And even if he give with little, that little will come back to him. The law will bring all in its appointed time, the time that is best for him and for the world. And so he starts with his available material, content with it because it is what the law brings him from the past. And whether full or scanty, he takes it and begins to work with it, knowing that however scanty it be, there is no limit to the wealth to which it may be increased. When I first read this, I thought, oh, like my ego was kind of offended that she thought I was bringing so little to the table. But then as I kind of let that go and reread it, I realized in the grand scheme of things how little I bring to the table. But even in that littleness, or in that, if there's an exactness in what I bring, it does have seed for future sowing.
Yeah. And again, these are all things that we go through and that we need to realize that this is just a wrong perception of the mind. Anything that is measurable, anything that our mind measures, is essentially built on an illusion. There is a story in Hinduism where there was a discussion of this kind of what is big, what is best, what is small, or a lot or a little. And then there is a goddess that said that when nature works on the leg of a flea, it puts as much attention as when nature builds a planet. And if you look with an electronic microscope, the leg of a flea is not just a little line. It has a lot of structures. It has a lot of complexity. For nature, there is nothing big or small. That's something that just our mind generates.
Right. So if it's important, we put a lot of energy into it. If we deem it unimportant, like a menial task or a small job, then this isn't helping humanity. This isn't saving the world. But that's not what this is about. This is about doing everything that you do with full presence and with full thought that it's going in the direction of the ideal. In the selection of the thoughts that he either generates or permits to come within his consciousness, his first motive for such choice will be the effect that these thoughts will have upon others, not in the effect that they will have upon himself. Far above and beyond all else, he is qualifying for service. Only next, he will consider the nature of the thoughts as they affect himself, as they react upon him to make his character.
So in our previous class, we saw about this work with our thoughts. And here Annie Besant is summarizing a little the previous class, or what she said in the previous lecture. These were some lectures. And then she's saying here that let us remember that the motive why we are working on ourselves is not for an imagined selfish spiritual career towards enlightenment, but it's really a more holistic concern. It's the question of what kind of influence am I being in the world? Of course, we are generating several things that we don't like, that at this moment we cannot help. None of us like, sadness, anger, this or that. There is a reason why we condemn these emotions and we feel bad when we feel them, which of course we shouldn't feel bad. This is just nature expressing. But the idea here is these are negative emotions because they affect other people along with ourselves. And this is why we don't like them. And we should keep that more holistic view. So when I am trying to work on my negative moods or thoughts or all that, if I can think of not so much myself, but I can think of, okay, my role here is to try to purify this nature that is affecting the whole to a little extent, and thankfully so, until we can get rid of all that is negative. I'm very happy to say, my influence on the world, thankfully is not all that big. I wouldn't want to be responsible of more suffering. So, but Annie Besant says this thought of looking at things globally is a key in this kind of path, and will keep you going even when you would feel disappointed or frustrated. Always it's more inspiring to think we are working for the whole.
Also, in making that character, he turns into a magnet for high and noble thoughts, for everything that is good, so that all that is good may flow into his consciousness to gain their fresh nourishment, and that he may act not only as a source of help by the thoughts he generates, but as a channel of helping by the thoughts that he receives, revivifies, and transmits. He will constantly be watching his thoughts in order that into this sanctuary of the consciousness nothing may come which will offend, for unless this be guarded, all else is left open to the enemy. There's a point in the book where she says that our mind is both a citadel and a gateway at the same time. So she talks about the control of thoughts last week, but that's what it is. It's a gateway to check, what those thoughts are and to let in and out. But it's also a strong citadel to make sure that nothing gets in that isn't directed towards the work that's going on.
Mm-hmm. So once the soul enters the temple in the inner court and goes through the process of initiation and all that, all his or her thoughts and emotions become far more powerful than they are right now. And they can become a blessing for humanity, but they also can become a source of injury because, they are very powerful. So this is why it is very important that we work on this right now, where the power of our thought is not so strong, whether for good or ill. And then it is right now that we have to start watching on this, and we can, confidently fall in our trying, because we are not given very strong weapons. So when we are going towards the outer court, we will be many times afflicted by negative thoughts and emotions. We have to be careful not to feel, guilty or to be afraid or what, am I destroying the world with this? Humility goes both ways, for the good and also for the bad. So, we will have many times, it is a given, it is known that at this point we will have many times unworthy thoughts or emotions. That is not our problem. Our problem is, how do we work with them? Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. The important is our work with them.
Right. So to reiterate, the whole purpose is the direction that we're going. Mm-hmm. It's not what's coming in, because she talks about this, that what comes into our life comes from our past karma. Mm-hmm. What we do with it will create our karma going forward. And we can only act at that moment by our past conditioning. Until we were able to be free of our conditioning, the only thing we can do, if I'm used to something, red scaring me, every time red comes up, I'm going to be scared until I can start training and looking to what my direction is. My direction is not to be scared anymore. And I start looking into it and really thinking about it. Then when red pops up, I can act differently and create something different.
Yeah. However, in that process, an adept that sees the whole process could probably determine you are going to take at least 10 years to get rid of that fear, because this fear had been fed for 10 lifetimes, suppose. So no matter how good your work at this, you will have to suffer this for 10 years. And that itself is accepting the karma of the past.
Right.
So when we are afraid, an adept knows there is no other option. This is in these conditions, this will happen. But what is it that we have to do? What we have to do is to do our best at this moment without judging if we succeed or not. Do the best at that moment, because if we do the best at each moment, after those 10 years, the fear will disappear. If we just say, I don't care about that, and keep identifying ourselves with the fear, then that fear will keep on feeding itself and will take longer in another lifetime. So again, this is an example of we just have to work on what is in front of us. Don't let your mind bring all these things of, I won't be able to do it, I'm not succeeding, when is this going to happen?
Right. No, I laughed because I thought you were going to say when there's some point where when we want to get rid of our fear of the only way to get rid of it is to have red show up every day in every way, every time we turn around, until we've just exhausted that karma.
Which is, your son is afraid of animals. How do you get him to grow over that? Well, maybe you take him to the zoo.
Right.
The only way to overcome something is to be faced with the situation. And that is how karma works. If karma decides, in quotation marks, this is allegorical,
right,
that you are a person that you want to learn, karma will bring the situation so that you can learn.
Right. Not always pleasant.
For the kid, it's probably not very pleasant to be brought to the zoo, but little by little, don't be afraid. Look how nice, he.
Right, and you don't start with showing them the lions, the crocodiles. You show them with the bunnies and the goats, and then he learns to guard his speech. For right speech, to begin with, must be true and accurate. Strict truthfulness is necessary above all to the student of occultism. For where there is not the seeking after truth, there is no possibility of anything but fall. For this quality of truth in the occultist is at once his guide and his shield. His guide in that it gives him the insight that enables him to choose the true road from the false, and his shield in that only as he protected by it can all the delusions and the glamours of the planes through which he passes fall harmless.
So she's talking here about an occultist, about the soul that is walking the path of initiation, and there are many challenges that we cannot even conceive at this point. And the war against illusion is very subtle, because we are constantly falling in illusions. But because we don't have a lot of power, when I act based on an illusion, well, I made my wife mad, or some coworker, and that is the extent of the problem. When we become universal forces, if I fall in the illusion, that has a more global, effect. So what Annie Besant is here saying is that at a certain point, when the soul has to face like the root of the illusions, which are very subtle, this is a dangerous point for the soul, and the soul has to be mature enough. And she says that what brings that shield against falling, and again, all fall is temporary, but against falling is this strict truthfulness. So in our daily life, there are many occasions in which we are not truthful. Maybe we are appearing or showing ourselves to others in a way that we are not. Actually, society requires that many times. Or we are saying something that is not quite truthful, or, many little things. Well, this is the time to work on this. Start looking at, why can't I be truthful about this? Is it that I am afraid of the consequences? Is it that I depend on what people think of me? There may be 1,000 causes. This is the time to start working on that.
The speech, first of all, then will be true, and next it will be gentle. For truth and gentleness are not in opposition, as too often we are inclined to think. The more true it is, the more gentle it needs to be. For at the very heart of all things is truth and also compassion. Therefore, the speech that reflects the innermost essence of the universe can neither causelessly wound any living being, nor be false with the slightest shadow of suspicion. When I was rereading over this chapter, I realized how much information there is, and especially on this part, she talks a lot about the thought, the speech, and then the action in this. And this part, she went into and said that the speech must be true and generous and gentle, and then she says it must be courteous and compassionate. When the thought is pure, speech is true and right. Action will inevitably be noble. So there's a definite pattern to watching the thoughts, watching the speech, and then naturally watching the action. And they come, in as she's saying, they come in that order.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's hard enough to have a truthful speech that then you have to add the gentleness.
Right.
So
yeah, it's one thing to be truthful. That I think we can all, okay, I'll be truthful.
On some occasions we can be truthful, but then we have to be gentle.
And then I was like, okay, I can try to be gentle. Then she had courteous, and then she added compassionate. And I was like, wow, I better just keep my mouth shut right now.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Then one realizes that silence is the
way
best
to go.
course of action.
And then out of right speaking and right thinking, inevitably must flow right acting. That, as an outcome, must be the result of this flowing forth from the source. For action is only the manifestation of that which is within, and where the thought is pure, where the speech is true and right, there the action must inevitably be noble. She also talks in the book about this, and Madame Blavatsky talks about it too, this groundwork, this ground, or this substance from which we can take from in order to find those virtues, that strength, that courage that we need. And when we make the effort, that the veil, or I think of the coating that keeps it from us, gets little holes in it, so we can start getting a little more of that pure essence by which to think from. Therefore, our speech is a little more pure, and then our actions come from a pure place naturally, not having to think about how we're going to act or how we're going to speak.
Now, you see that this is the reversal of regular morality.
Right.
Normally, morality is focused on the action. It doesn't matter what you really desire, what your intention is, what you are thinking about, just don't do that. And that is good enough. And from a certain point of view, it's understandable. What regular morality is trying to do is to hold the inner little beast,
right,
so that we can live together. Now, and that is also a good rule of conduct. It's quite evident, it's very objective, do this, don't do that. But of course, for an occultist, far more is necessary. So what the occult way of working on this is working on the cause of everything. That is our perception, and then our thoughts, our speech, and our action.
I think this is a good example of the distinction she makes between the virtuous, the righteous, the religious man, and the man or woman, and the soul that's in the outer court. It's a natural flow. And a good like little indicator when I was reading was that if there's any tinge of jealousy or any tinge of anger or any tinge of anything, I know that it's not up. I know I'm not there yet, because eventually all that is part of the ego. So eventually all that gets cleared away, and then my thinking, my speaking, my acting can come from a place where the ego isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so here again, it all depends on, we have to be very careful how we let our mind look at this. Because if we look at this to see if there is any of this, if there is any of that, we are assuming that there shouldn't be. And then we will be blind to that and try to tell ourselves we are great, or we will be frustrated when we see it. So rather than looking at if there is this, we can start by trying to see where this is. Let us assume that this is here, because we are in this process of growth. So we don't want to see if this is here. We want to see where this is. And then we start from that humble point of view.
And that is the threefold cord by which the aspirant is bound alike to humanity and to his master. Self-control in thought, in speech, and in action. That is the triple cord which binds the man to service. I like that part in the book. Working with the ideal. When all this is realized and the beginning of it attempted, this candidate of ours will begin a very definite method of practice in his building of the character. And first he will form what is called the ideal.
So this is the method that Annie Besant proposes for the growth of virtue. There are different approaches to how to stimulate virtue. And she herself talks in all her writings about, different ways. In this particular book, she makes emphasis on working with the ideal, and we will see why. And then, it's a good thing to try in our lives.
An idea is an idea of the abstract kind. It is the work of the image-building faculty of the mind, which draws out the essence of all the different ideas that it has gained of great virtues, of that which is beautiful, true, harmonious, and compassionate, of that which is in every sense satisfying to the aspirations of the mind, of the heart. From all these different ideas, as they have been seen limited in manifestation, the essence is extracted, and then the mind constructs a vast heroic figure in which everything is carried to perfection, in which everything touches its highest and most complete expression.
So in the book, she gives the example of, how we generate abstract ideas about the world that we see. So she says, if you show a child a triangle, and then you show the child a different triangle, the child is not going to recognize the commonalities of the two. He will see two different shapes, and for him, they will be completely different figures. But in time, as he's exposed more and more to different shapes of triangles, the mind begins to catch the essence of what a triangle is. So right now, we have in our mind the concept of the triangle with no particular form. If I tell you, think of a triangle, then you have to visualize one particular form. But regardless of any particular form, you have an abstract concept that allows you to recognize that the triangle that you thought about, or any other kind of triangle. So that is absorbing or distilling the abstract idea, which Annie Besant says is a function of the higher mind. So the same can be applied to virtues. We know a loving mother. We know a courageous soldier. We know, specific expressions of virtue, and those specific expressions are normally limited. But by seeing love expressed in different ways, a mother, a lover, an uncle, a leader, a loving slave, whatever. Then we, meditating on that, we can extract the essence of love and what aspect is shared by all these different manifestations. And then in meditation, we try to picture this, to have a feeling of this as embodied, for example, in an enlightened being, in a deity, whatever attracts our devotion. But basically, this is what she's explaining.
Right. She says, that's what she says in her book, that the way to get to the ideal is through contemplation. And it's through strong contemplation in a particular direction that you will get to this abstract idea. So like Pablo said, instead of looking for love in nature or love in this or love in that, you get that love in general, and then you can find it or see it in every single being and every single thing in the world. The same with strength. You're not just seeing that this is strong or this is strong, but there is strength that pervades this. So that's the direction in which we're talking about here.
So, for example, if we meditate on an idea like the master, for example, as the expression of perfect love, that expression will have the best quality of the love of a mother, the best quality of the love of a son, or daughter, the best quality of all the different kinds of love. And what is the essence of that? And that unbounded and conditioned love, that is the expression of an enlightened consciousness. And so in this contemplation and trying to, making an effort to catch the essence of the virtue, we are actually awakening that virtue in our divine nature.
And I look at it as too, when we don't see the ideal and we just see each idea of it, we're seeing the separateness. And so therefore we have to really look at it to see, well, maybe I don't see it here because it's not like this or it's not like that. But when we can tap into the higher essence, that consciousness that Pablo said, then we can see how it's just universal throughout, and we can stop with that separateness, which as soon as we can stop with that separateness, we can stop with some of the anger falls away and some of the frustration and some of the hate will fall away. And this perfect figure, mighty and harmonious in all its proportions, is grander than anything we have seen manifested. The aspirant makes for himself that ideal of perfection, as perfect as he is able to conceive it, knowing all the time that his most perfect dreaming is but the faintest shadow of the reality whence this reflection has come. For in the world of the real, there exists in living light that which down here he sees, as it were, in faint reflection of color. This ideal he forms is still imperfect, but however imperfect it may be, for him it is nonetheless the ideal according to which his character is to be built.
Yeah, so this is what the opposite to what we normally do with divine beings or divine realities. We tend to drag the realities to our own conditioning and imagine God as a man with beard sitting on a throne. This is the opposite. How abstract can you conceive of this? And my ability to conceive the spiritual essence may be limited, but that is my highest conception. And for me, that is my ideal. In time, I may be able to perceive even deeper, more spiritual essences, and then that will be my ideal. We have to work with the highest that we can attain.
And that was a good example because it made me think, so here, if we think of, if I think of God looking this way as a woman and your God is a man, well, then that's a different God. But if we can get to the place where we're looking at the essence of that, then there are no differences, and therefore we can get rid of some of the separation, the conflict, and the aggression. Mm-hmm. But why make an ideal? It is written in one of the most mystical of the Upanishads, the Chandogya, man is a creature of reflection. What he reflects upon, that he becomes. Therefore, reflect upon Brahman. You must have the ideal before you in order that you may reflect it. That on which the mind is constantly dwelling will inevitably be that which the man shall become.
Mm-hmm. So this has been present in most traditions. In the whatever we constantly keep in mind, we little by little become that. So if we are constantly worried about one aspect of life or the other, we begin to be that. I remember when I was following my scientific career, at some point I realized I'm not looking at the world as a human being. I'm looking at the world as a scientist, and that I didn't really like that because that was a very specific way of looking at things. So whatever is constantly in our minds is what shapes our minds. So, the spending some time every day to contemplate the spiritual perfection that we can conceive is a way to shape our mind in that way.
So she gives this list from, and I believe she was talking about the 16th discord of the Bhagavad Gita, and this is the list to contemplate on a regular basis.
Yeah, the list of virtues.
Right. Fearlessness, purity of heart, steadfastness in wisdom, almsgiving, self-restraint and sacrifice, study of the Shastras, austerity and straightforwardness, harmlessness, truth, absence of wrath, renunciation, peacefulness, absence of calumny, compassion to living beings, uncovetousness, mildness, modesty, absence of fickleness, boldness, forgiveness, fortitude, uprightness, enmity, and absence of pride. That's a short list. We're done.
For the next 16 lifetimes.
Exactly.
Yes, this is taken when Krishna describes, an enlightened being, let's say.
And she does add this caveat. This is to be practiced daily, but never with the feeling of discouragement at the lack of being able to get through it. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that's mainly when we see in spiritual literature descriptions of God or the divine or this or that, is to give us some seeds for meditation. So take the one that you feel drawn to, that either you love that virtue or you feel the need to develop it, and just meditate in this way.
Right. And I know for me, I know I always say this, I'm not a real strong meditator. So I started with more mundane things. It was hard for me to contemplate on a virtue. So I started contemplating on more physical things. So I contemplated on a flower or on a stone. And that was just to get my mind, like she says in the beginning, just to get my mind going in one direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as we said last week.
And how shall the building towards the ideal be made? By contemplation, definitely with full purpose. This aspirant who is disciplining his own character will contemplate day by day the ideal he has built. He will fix his mind upon it and constantly reflect it in his consciousness. Within him will rise up that reverence and that awe which are worship, the great transforming power by which the man becomes that which he adores.
One problem in our culture is that we, for the most part, we have lost this. We don't have these kind of ideals, spiritual ideals. Our heroes are sport people or actors or,
Who has the most money.
Yeah, or those who have more money or more cunning, and they don't awake any kind of spiritual devotion. So this is a true lack in our spiritual path, and we should work on this and consciously start trying to think what is sacred for me. Those who are attracted to the Theosophical literature, the ideal there is the master, the Mahatma, and reading about them and really understanding how they are an expression of what we really are. All this can help in this endeavor. Or you can use, if you have spiritual teachers or deities, you belong to some religion, use all these.
And it doesn't even have to be a deity. You can easily switch out, if you switch out the word love for any deity, then it's the same thing, because that's going to the ideal, the essence of what that is.
Yes, you can always take virtues as ideals. It's a little more abstract. Patanjali, for example, says that you can meditate on virtues. Many times it's easier to meditate on the embodiment of virtues,
Right.
The love of Jesus. For those who have devotion for Jesus, meditating on the love of Jesus as opposed to just love is far more powerful. If we have a more abstract mind or we don't have, devotion, then yes, we can work on the virtues.
But what if I'm not a religious person and there's no embodiment that I can see?
Yeah.
Can the love of nature, or is there...
Anything will work, anything. If the conception of the higher self works for you, or the virtue itself, that is part of what we have to do. We have to find what is sacred for us, because we live in a secular world, and because that sacredness is not nourished, then we grow up and we don't have it.
Right.
And that is a real hindrance in the path.
Concentration, mindfulness. In order that he may thus contemplate, he must train himself in concentration. The mind is not to be scattered, as our minds so often are. We have to learn to fix it, and to fix it steadily. And this is a thing that we should be working at continually. Working at in all the common things of life, doing one thing at a time until the mind answers obediently to the impulse, and doing it with the concentrated energy which bends the whole mind towards a single point. And I apologize because I think I might have gotten ahead.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to contemplate on a virtue if you don't have control of the mind here, which is needed. So
Yeah, so this is always recommended in the Theosophical tradition. Again, before we can do something, we need to develop the skill. So if we find that it is hard for us to meditate on a virtue, well, perhaps it is because we have not worked on concentrating the mind, and there are more material objects for us to first develop that skill that then can be applied.
No matter that many things that you have to do are trivial, it is the way of doing them, and not the things that are done, which makes the training that results in discipleship. What matters is the mind that you bring to it, the forces with which you execute it, the training that you gain from it. And no matter what the life may be, it will serve for the purpose of the training. For however trivial may be a particular piece of work, you can use it as a training ground for the mind, and by your concentration, you may be making your mind one-pointed. And once the mind is definitely in your hand, you can choose the end to which it shall be directed. And like it says here, and like we said before, life is a great training ground for this, because there are very few of us who do these grand, great works on a regular basis. Most of the time, we're doing menial tasks, or tasks that are needed to be repeated and done over again. And what a great training ground to work on the mind being focused, and the perfection of the work, and the joy of doing something that doesn't seem like it matters, but it does.
Yeah. I remember when I came across this concept, it was very meaningful to me, because most things in life really were kind of boring to me. And then when I realized, it doesn't matter that even if something is trivial, it can be transcendental, because this can be building what is needed for something more transcendental. Then I realized it doesn't matter if I work digging a hole, work selling candies, or work in a laboratory. It's all the same. What matters is, can I use this as a training? And that is far more, transcendental than the little results I can get from the particular action.
Right. Because the only thing that wants to do grand things, it really serves no bigger purpose except for feeding the ego. So I think life just sends us these other jobs, and a menial doesn't mean that's not like manual, or the repetitive work that we do is for this very purpose. There's no better training ground.
So, we don't pay attention in daily life, and then we pay a lot of money to go to a meditation retreat to pay attention artificially.
Right.
So we have opportunities for concentration for free in daily life.
Right. And there's a funny story about there's a Buddhist monk who was having a hard time meditating. And so he said, all I can think about is this woman. And so the head of the the monastery said, focus all your concentration, all your contemplation, all your everything on this woman. And so he did, and it says he's reached enlightenment. So, that's a good thing that it can be reached by any means. The little things that are around us every day are very much better for this. The real value of the soul is tested more in the little things where there is nothing to arouse attention, nothing in any sense to gain applause, where the man is deliberately working for the end that he has chosen and is using everything around him in order that he may discipline himself. That self-discipline is the key of the whole.
She says in the book that if something really important or a crisis or something comes, then by the very bigness of the situation, that draws all our attention.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that we can draw the attention whenever we want. So she's saying the little things, because they don't naturally draw our attention, are far better training than the big things, because then it is us, the one that has to make the effort.
Take so simple a thing as a definite rule of rising in the morning. Fix the time that you feel is best and keep to it. If you find after some time that you have chosen badly, then change. Do not be rigid because you are striving to strengthen your will, but change it at your own time and with perfect deliberation. And never make your rule a hindrance to those around you, or choose ways of self-discipline that aggravate or interrupt others instead of simply training yourself. And this is really important because I think, I made this, I have to stick to it. But it's in that reevaluation, that re-looking at what the goal is, what I'm accomplishing, and is this working towards the goal, or am I just forcing something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because many times we make a decision not really conscious of all the forces that are playing, regarding that situation or that decision. When we actually try to do it, we start being, more aware of other things before we weren't. So if that is the case, it's fine to reshape our aim to adapt to the situation. Now, what Besant says is, don't let this happen just because you don't feel like doing it.
Right.
Just be deliberate and say, this is possible, this is okay, so I will do my best to follow this.
The method. When all this has been clearly recognized as the way in which the character is to be builded, the next stage will be to study the character itself, for you are to work with knowledge and not blindly. In judging your character, take some of the things that great men have put before you as outlining a character which will lead you to the gate of the temple.
Mm-hmm. So see, here she's giving an interesting sequence. First, she says, you have to recognize all this intellectually. This is the step where the study can help us. You first work on building the vision of understanding, the whole picture. Once that is there, that can serve as an inspiration that convinced the mind is good to go in this way. So the next stage is not immediately trying to force yourself to agree with that vision. The next step is one of self-knowledge, of self-observation. Start knowing the ideal, start to look at how your personality actually is before you try to change it. Get to realize how the personality is.
Find a list of qualities that serve as part of your constant thought and endeavor, remembering that the character is built first by the contemplation of the virtue, and then by working out of that virtue, which has become part of the thought, into the speech and the action of daily life. You develop a quality first, by daily thinking on what it means and working it out bit by bit until you thoroughly understand it. And then, when you go out into the world, by practicing it in your daily life. So she's just not here. She's here not just giving a list of techniques. Don't just rise up early every morning or, do this with full thought. What she's giving you is the ideal of how to think for yourself, basically, how to observe yourself, how to think for yourself, how to readapt when something isn't working, which is what we want. We want to learn to be, we want to teach our children to be thinkers, to be
self-reliant.
Right, to be self-reliant, which she uses a lot in the book, and to be able to think a process through instead of following directions.
So she's saying, first, understand the process, understand the aim, understand the general idea. Then start looking at your personality. Then you will realize what kind of virtues would be good to work on. So the next step is to start meditating on the virtues, keeping them in mind, start thinking about them. And then little by little, that has to be translated into daily life. But there is a period that may be quite long, a gap between your aspiration and your actual conduct. When we start contemplating being peaceful and we start, desiring that in a more spiritual way, and we start aspiring to this and becoming in love with the idea of peacefulness, that doesn't mean that we can be peaceful right away just because we love that. But it is a natural step. First, it has to take birth in your mind and in your emotions. And then it will little by little translate into the actions. And, if we try to act peacefully during our daily life, we are helping that birth into the objective world. But there is always a gap. It's not that we are hypocrites if we have an idea and we don't act like that. If we really have the idea, not that we just say it, there will be a gap, and it's inevitable.
I was thinking, it's like the idea of trying to be a peaceful parent in the midst of trying to parent. And that's not always the ideal situation to be, but it is something to strive
But
for.
it also depends on the external circumstances. It doesn't depend completely on us, because your kids may be very peaceful and easygoing, or they may be very difficult, and you having exactly the same amount of peace, you will respond in two completely ways. Right. So we can never judge ourselves, because the whole universe is playing out in each action.
Right. So that's why the direction, the ideal and the direction towards it are what.
If you have these nice kids, you will think, oh, I'm very peaceful and I'm so good at this. Or if you have...
And then they come to my house.
Yeah. Or you have really difficult kids, then you may say, I'm terrible at this. And we are not isolated. Everything is connected. So.
Each of these may be practiced, at first, of course, very imperfectly, but still steadily, knowing that each step is a step towards an end which shall be achieved. Thus thinking and thus practicing, you will find a sense of calm, strength, and serenity grow within you, so that you feel as though you were in a place of peace, no matter what the storm in the outer world, and you will see and feel the storm and yet not be shaken by it. This is really a nice paragraph, and we only had to cut and paste part of it, but it's really a nice paragraph where she does a very poetic job of describing this piece. It almost made me feel like I could get there.
So she's talking about where this is leading. What's the flowering of this?
And out of this grows the sense of self-control, that the self within is stronger than the changes without, and while it is willing to respond, it refuses to be altered by the contacts from without. And then, from this, comes the power of hating none, on which so much stress is laid in all the building of character laid down for the aspirant who would become the disciple. And this is basically the crux of it. This is what we talked about earlier. The whole idea is to be able to come from a place that is no longer hate and or aggression.
Of course,
or
hate,
conflict.
we can take hate in a very gross sense, or there are many subtle ways of hate.
Dislike is one of them.
When she's talking, hating none, we may say, "Oh, I don't hate anybody," but we have maybe that hate is in a subtler way,
right?
Like dislike
or frustration.
Right.
Yeah.
But the root of hate, philosophically speaking, and anger is fear, basically. So what she's saying there is that if we want to move beyond that, we have to get to that inner strength. And to get to that inner strength, that absolute self-confidence, not confidence in the personality, because the personality is always limited and fallible. The real self-confidence is a confidence in the real self. And we can get there by means of peace, by means of contemplating in silence. We get more in touch with this.
Which is the natural state of the higher self is this peace, this, this beauty, this love, all with capital letters. That is the essence of it. And it's our personality by its very nature, which the idea is to purify it so it becomes more peaceful and more loving. But its very nature is separating, which is not peaceful and which is not tends towards love.
Mm-hmm. So basically, it's not that we are trying to develop something we don't have. What we are trying to do is purifying the personality that keeps getting in the way from love, in the way of love, in the way of happiness and peace. That's why Annie Besant starts with purification. As the personality is purified, we find that all these virtues are our natural state, and they start manifesting through the personality.
So through the contemplation of virtues, or through the contemplation on virtues, what we're trying to do is create a vibration in the personality, which the virtue of the higher self can naturally find an attraction towards. Because she talks about, if we can get to those places, then we will naturally attract nobler thoughts and nobler vibrations.
Mm-hmm.
So then we learn gradually and slowly to walk fearlessly in the world, fearlessly even though things may still injure. For we know if we hurt that we are only paying the debt of an evil in the past, and that for every debt that is paid, there is less against us, as it were in the account book of nature. And fearless too, because we learn to know, and the man who knows has passed beyond doubt. And out of this grows a firm and unshaken will, a will that is based on knowledge, and a will that grows confident through love.
Yes, so here we see that chain of manifestation in the sense of how things flourish. And, this is good to contemplate. Again, we don't have to take this as ambition. This is something that naturally, little by little, will express in our personality. So, this is more or less what we wanted to share with you for this chapter. And in our next week, we are going to continue
Spiritual Alchemy.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good week.